Am I wrong for telling my stepbrother I don't care that his child died? Hi everyone. My name is Kevin, I'm 32 years old, and I never imagined I'd be telling my story like this. Even now, 2 years later, it still feels unreal, like it happened to someone else and not me. 2 years ago, my entire world collapsed in a matter of minutes. At the time, I was married to Jessica, and she was pregnant with what I believed was our first child. I was working hard, planning for the future, and doing everything I could to be a good husband and soon-to-be father. I genuinely thought my life was on track. I was wrong. That day, I wasn't supposed to come home early from work. My schedule had changed at the last minute, and no one knew I'd be back so soon. Looking back, I think that's why they felt safe. That's why they didn't bother hiding. When I walked into the house, everything seemed normal, too normal. It was quiet. No noise. No sign that my life was about to be destroyed. Then I opened the bedroom door. There was Jessica, my pregnant wife, in bed with my stepbrother, Mason, who was 28 years old. I can't fully describe what that moment felt like. My brain froze. My stomach dropped. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. I remember thinking I had to be dreaming, because there was no way this could be real. But it was. My wife. My stepbrother. Together. In my bed. I didn't handle it well. I'll be honest about that. I completely snapped. Years of trust, love, and loyalty shattered instantly, and all that pain turned into pure rage. I started screaming. I threw things. I broke furniture. I said things I can't take back. At one point, I attacked Mason. I was blinded by anger and betrayal. I wasn't thinking about consequences, I was thinking about how the two people closest to me had just ruined my life. The noise was so loud that neighbors called the police. By the time officers arrived, the house looked destroyed, and I was still completely out of control emotionally. Instead of anyone asking why this happened or what I had just walked into, the focus was on my reaction. The police escorted me out of my own home, and I'll never forget that moment, being taken away in handcuffs while my cheating wife stood behind me, crying like she was the victim. What hurt even more was what came next. Jessica had recorded the entire meltdown. Not the cheating. Not the betrayal. Just my reaction to it. She showed that video to people and told everyone she cheated because I had anger issues and that I used to hit her. That part was a complete lie. I had never laid a hand on her before. Not once. Anyone who truly knew me would have told you that. But the internet didn't want the truth. People online immediately believed her. A pregnant woman crying on camera was enough. I was labeled an abusive husband overnight. No one cared that she had cheated with my stepbrother. No one cared about what I walked in on. I ended up spending several weeks in jail before everything was sorted out. When I finally got out, my life was already destroyed. My marriage was over. My name was dragged through the mud. Friends distanced themselves. People whispered. And opportunities disappeared. I lost more than just my wife that day. I lost my reputation, my sense of security, and the future I thought I was building. And that was only the beginning of the nightmare. After I was released from jail, things didn't calm down, they got worse. The divorce process turned into another battlefield. Jessica didn't just want to leave me, she wanted to take everything from me. She went after the house, my savings, and even demanded child support, all while continuing to present herself as the poor, abandoned, pregnant woman who had escaped an abusive marriage. For a while, it looked like she might actually succeed. But then the court ordered a paternity test. That single test changed everything. The baby wasn't mine. When the results came back, the truth finally surfaced, at least legally. I was immediately cleared of any responsibility, and I did not have to pay child support. It was painful to see it confirmed on paper, but at the same time, it was a strange kind of relief. One more lie had collapsed. There was another thing that saved me, something I had almost ignored before my wedding. Before we got married, my sister practically forced me to sign a prenup. At the time, I thought she was being overly cautious, maybe even cynical. I almost didn't do it. But I'm grateful every single day that I listened to her. Because of that prenup, Jessica walked away with nothing. No house. No savings. No money from me at all. And yet, she still managed to play the victim. Online and among certain people, she claimed she had been left with nothing and a baby. People sympathized with her. Strangers donated money. Friends of friends defended her. No one wanted to talk about the affair. No one wanted to mention that the child wasn't mine or that she had cheated with my stepbrother. I had lost control once, and that was all anyone wanted to remember. While all of this was happening, my father was going through his own hell. When he found out that Mason had an affair with my wife, it shattered him. It wasn't just betrayal, it was shame, anger, and disbelief all mixed together. The situation caused a massive fight between my dad and my stepmother, Karen. Karen sided with Mason. She said Mason was just in love, that he and Jessica matched better, and that at least something good had come out of it, a baby. She even said she was happy to be a grandmother and tried to pressure my dad into playing the role of a proud, happy grandparent. My dad refused. That refusal almost ended their marriage. Things got so bad that they seriously discussed divorce. My dad felt completely disrespected, not just as a father, but as a human being who still had morals. At that point, I told my dad something I didn't think I'd ever say. I told him it wasn't worth divorcing because of me. I told him I wouldn't be angry at him if he chose to stay with Karen. I didn't want my life's disaster to destroy his marriage too. After that conversation, my dad and Karen worked things out, but nothing was ever the same. My dad made one thing very clear. Mason and Jessica were no longer welcome in his house. Ever. He didn't cut Karen off, but he also never accepted Mason's choices or excused what he had done. There were no family dinners, no pretending, no playing happy grandparents. Despite everything, my dad and I stayed close. Our relationship actually became stronger. He never once blamed me for what happened, and he never tried to force forgiveness where it didn't belong. Now, fast forward 2 years. After everything that happened, I slowly rebuilt my life. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but I moved on. I stayed away from drama, focused on my work, and surrounded myself with people who actually cared about me. For the first time in a long while, I can honestly say I'm in a very good place mentally and emotionally. The chaos that once consumed my life finally felt far away. On the other hand, Mason and Jessica's lives did not turn out well. I heard that after the baby was born, they moved away. I didn't ask where, and I didn't care enough to find out. As far as I was concerned, they were no longer part of my world. Then, about 2 months ago, I heard something that stopped everyone else, but strangely, not me. Their son had died. From what I was told, the baby, who was almost 2 years old, drowned while they were on vacation. The details were vague, but the outcome was clear. A toddler was gone. I understand that no parent is ever okay after losing a child, especially one so young. That kind of loss destroys people. I can recognize that logically and emotionally, at least on a human level. But when I heard the news, I didn't feel what people expected me to feel. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel satisfaction either. I felt nothing. It was like hearing about something tragic that happened to a stranger. Something distant. Unrelated to my life. I remember waiting for some emotion to hit me, shock, grief, anything, but it never came. Maybe by then I had already become stone cold after everything they had put me through. Or maybe all the pain Mason and Jessica caused me had burned out whatever empathy I once had for them. I don't know. All I know is that their tragedy didn't reach me. A few weeks later, I went to visit my dad. While I was there, Karen told me what had happened. She was crying, clearly grieving, clearly devastated. This was her grandson, after all. I listened quietly. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't argue. I didn't say anything cruel. But I also didn't react the way she wanted me to. There were no tears. No visible pain. No words of comfort. Just silence. I could tell my lack of reaction angered her. It was written all over her face. But she didn't say anything, not then. She was grieving, and even she seemed to know that starting a fight in that moment wouldn't help. I left shortly after. That was when I realized something important about myself. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt anymore. But I also wasn't emotionally connected to their lives in any way. Whatever they went through, good or bad, no longer felt like my responsibility. And that realization would soon be tested. 2 days later, I went to visit my dad again. The visit itself was normal. Quiet. Almost comforting. We talked about everyday things, work, small plans, nothing heavy. For once, Mason and Jessica weren't hanging in the air between us, and I appreciated that more than I realized. That night, after I got home, I checked my email. That's when I saw it. An email from Mason. I hadn't heard from him in 2 years, so seeing his name in my inbox caught me off guard. Not because I felt anger or fear, but because it felt strange that he thought he still had the right to reach out. I opened it. The email was long and carefully written, like he had spent a lot of time thinking about every word. He started by saying that Karen had told him about my reaction when she shared the news of his son's death. He said he understood that I didn't show emotion and that I was probably still angry with him, and that, according to him, I had every reason to be. Then he shifted into what sounded like self-reflection. He wrote that after losing their son, he and Jessica didn't want to be in a bad place with anyone anymore. He said grief had changed them, that life suddenly felt fragile, and that holding on to past conflicts no longer made sense to him. He said he wanted to do things right and try to move forward without bitterness. He talked about how the loss had forced him to look back at his choices. He admitted mistakes, carefully worded, vague ones. He never actually apologized for the affair. He never said my name next to the word sorry. Instead, he wrote about regret in general terms, about how things spiraled and how he wished they had handled everything differently. Toward the end, he asked me to call him. He said he wanted to talk, to clear the air, to finally have an honest conversation. He even included his phone number, writing that I could reach him anytime, day or night. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time. I waited for something to happen inside me, for anger, sadness, satisfaction, even curiosity. Nothing came. I didn't feel tempted to respond. I didn't feel the urge to confront him or tell my side of the story. I didn't feel the need to forgive him or reject him out loud. I simply felt detached. It wasn't about punishment or revenge. I wasn't trying to hurt him by staying silent. I just genuinely did not want him back in my life in any form. Not as a brother. Not as a stranger asking for closure. Not even as someone grieving. Whatever he was dealing with now, grief, guilt, regret, that was his journey, not mine. So I did nothing. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't save the number. I didn't forward it or delete it right away either. I closed my laptop and went on with my evening. That's when it finally hit me, I wasn't holding on to anger anymore. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't hoping for justice. I had already moved past them, not emotionally, but existentially. They no longer had a place in my life, my thoughts, or my future. And for the first time since everything fell apart, that realization felt peaceful. But my silence wasn't going to be taken quietly. I genuinely believed that ignoring Mason's first email would be the end of it. I had made my choice. I didn't want contact, conversation, or closure. I had rebuilt my life by cutting them out completely, and I assumed that my silence would be understood for what it was, a final answer. I was wrong. Not long after that first email, I received another email from Mason. This one had a different tone. It was no longer reflective or carefully worded. It was more direct, almost insistent. He wrote that he wanted to meet me in person, just the two of us, to settle everything between us once and for all. He said it was time to stop avoiding the past and finally talk face to face, like adults. He framed it as something necessary. Something healing. Something unavoidable. I read it slowly, then closed it. Once again, I didn't reply. At this point, it wasn't hesitation or indecision. It was a conscious choice. I had already said everything that needed to be said, by walking away and staying gone. I didn't know him another second of my time. That's when Karen stepped in. She called me not long after, her voice already tense before I even said hello. She told me that Mason and Jessica were struggling badly, that losing their son had left them completely broken. She said they wanted to meet me, to talk, to make things right, and finally restore some sense of peace in the family. She talked about pain. She talked about grief. She talked about forgiveness. I let her finish without interrupting. Then I told her, very plainly, that I didn't care what Mason and Jessica were feeling. I told her I had no interest in meeting them now or ever. I told her that my life was finally stable, and I wasn't about to reopen wounds that had taken years to close. The silence on the line was heavy. Then her tone changed. She called me selfish. She called me cruel. She said I had no heart, no emotions, that I'd turned into a cold person. She told me that after everything Mason and Jessica had gone through, I should be supporting them instead of punishing them. According to her, their grief should outweigh my trauma. According to her, their loss should erase my past. I told her no. I told her that grief doesn't cancel betrayal. That tragedy doesn't rewrite history. And that forgiveness is not something anyone is entitled to. She kept pushing. She wouldn't let the conversation end. She kept insisting that I needed to be the bigger person. That's when my dad stepped in. He told Karen, firmly and without hesitation, that I didn't owe Mason or Jessica a conversation, comfort, or forgiveness. He said that if I didn't want contact with them, that decision needed to be respected. He made it clear that he stood by me completely. Karen didn't accept that answer. She dropped the subject for the moment, but I could tell she wasn't done. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Mason. I don't know how he got my number, and honestly, at that point, I didn't care. I answered before I could stop myself, and the moment I heard his voice, I knew I shouldn't have. He sounded worn down. Hollow. Desperate. He told me they were grieving, that losing their son had destroyed them. He said they needed to talk to me, that this was something that had to happen in person, man to man. He kept repeating that word needed, like his pain somehow created an obligation for me. I let him speak. Then I stopped him. I told him, calmly and without emotion, that I didn't care what he was going through. I told him that whatever he was feeling now did not undo what he had done to me. And I told him that his grief was not my responsibility to carry. I told him to never call me again. Before he could argue, explain, or beg, I hung up. I didn't feel angry afterward. I didn't feel powerful or satisfied. I just felt finished. At that moment, I truly believed that I had finally drawn a line so clear that it couldn't be crossed again. I thought they would finally understand that I wasn't part of their lives anymore, not their past, not their present, and definitely not their healing. I thought that was the end of it. But history had already taught me one thing. They never respected my boundaries before. And they weren't about to start now. A few days passed after that phone call, and for the first time, I truly believed it was over. I had been clear. I had said no multiple times. I had ignored emails, ended calls, and drawn lines that couldn't have been more obvious. Then one evening, completely unannounced, they showed up at my house. I opened the door without thinking, expecting maybe a delivery or a neighbor. Instead, I was met with Mason and Jessica standing there, looking exhausted, tense, and determined. Before I could even process what was happening, they walked past me and into my house as if they still belonged there. No asking. No permission. No respect. It felt like everything from the past rushing back in an instant. They sat down and immediately started talking about how they wanted to settle things, how they couldn't move forward in life without resolving things with me. Mason kept saying that after losing their son, they needed peace, forgiveness, and support. He talked about family, about closure, about how holding on to old wounds was unhealthy for everyone. Then Jessica started crying. Not quiet crying, deep, uncontrollable sobbing. She talked about the silence in their home, about how every room reminded her of their son. She said they were barely functioning, that waking up every day felt unbearable. She kept repeating how broken they were, how much pain they were in, how they needed understanding from everyone, including me. I stood there listening, my arms crossed, my mind oddly calm. When she finally stopped speaking, I told them the truth. I told them I had no sympathy for them. I told them I wanted nothing to do with them. And I told them that I did not care what they were going through. I said they were my past, and I had worked too hard to move forward to let them drag me backward again. I made it clear that they were not welcome in my home and never would be. I also told them something else, something they clearly weren't prepared to hear. I told them that they don't get forgiveness just because their son died. Loss does not erase betrayal. Grief does not undo damage. Tragedy does not buy redemption. Instead of leaving, they stayed. They stood there and told me I was cruel, that I was heartless for speaking that way to grieving parents. Mason said I had no emotions left, that I was cold and broken. Jessica said no decent person would talk like that to people who had lost a child. I told them, again, to leave. They refused. That was when something inside me finally gave way. After being cornered in my own home, after being pushed emotionally despite repeated warnings, I lost my restraint. I said the thing I had been holding back, the thing I knew was harsh but felt forced out of me. I told them, I don't care that your son died. And maybe this is karma. The room went dead silent. I knew the moment the words left my mouth how brutal they sounded. I knew they crossed a line. But they had pushed me to my breaking point. I had tried to stay calm. I had tried to end it without cruelty. They wouldn't stop. Jessica let out a loud, broken scream and collapsed into uncontrollable crying. Mason's face twisted with rage. He started shouting that I was evil, that I was holding on to the past, that I must feel good knowing they were suffering. He accused me of being happy about their son's death. Then he completely lost control. Mason began destroying things in my house, knocking over furniture, smashing items in my room, yelling about how unfair life was. Watching him rage in my home felt disturbingly familiar, like the night everything first fell apart years ago. That was the moment I knew this was no longer just emotional, it was dangerous. I stepped away and called the police. When officers arrived, Mason was still furious and aggressive, and Jessica was hysterical. After hearing what happened and seeing the damage, the police removed both of them from my house. As they were taken away, neither of them looked back at me. When the door finally closed, I stood alone in my damaged living room, shaking, not from fear, not from anger, but from sheer exhaustion. I hadn't wanted it to end like that. I hadn't planned to say those words. But I had been pushed to a place where silence and restraint no longer worked. That night made one thing painfully clear. They were never looking for peace. They were looking for absolution. And they were willing to tear my life apart again to get it. And that was the moment I decided, completely and permanently, that this was the last time they would ever have access to me. I thought calling the police and having Mason and Jessica removed from my house would finally end everything. I was wrong again. The very next day, my phone started ringing. The first call was from Karen. She was crying so hard at first that I could barely understand her. Then her words became clear and vicious. She called me heartless, cruel, and inhuman. She said she couldn't believe I could speak that way to parents who had lost a child. She told me I was selfish, that I only cared about myself, and that I had no soul left. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I just listened. And for the first time, I realized something strange. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't angry either. I was detached. Her words meant nothing to me anymore. Then came the next call. Jessica's mother. She didn't cry. She screamed. She called me every name she could think of. She said I was evil, broken, and that I deserved everything that had happened to me. She told me I was the reason her daughter's life was ruined. She blamed me for the affair, for the divorce, for the chaos, and even for their son's death, in a twisted way. She said no one would ever love me. She said I would die alone. She said I should be ashamed to exist. I hung up without saying a word. Then Jessica's friends started calling. One after another. Some yelled. Some cursed. Some accused me of enjoying their pain. What struck me the most was the hypocrisy. These were the same people who had supported the affair. The same people who had defended Jessica when she cheated with my stepbrother. The same people who helped destroy my reputation years ago. Back then, I was the villain for reacting. Now, I was the villain for not forgiving. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the audacity was unreal. These people had no problem tearing my life apart when it suited them, but now they expected empathy from me on demand. That was when my dad finally snapped. Karen called him next, still crying, still furious, still insisting that I was a monster and that he needed to control me. And for the first time in years, my dad didn't stay quiet. He told her he had tolerated her behavior for far too long. He told her he had swallowed his anger when she defended Mason's affair. He told her he stayed silent when she tried to force him to play happy grandfather. And he told her that attacking me, again, after I had finally started living a normal life was his breaking point. He told her he was done. He told her he was filing for divorce. Karen tried to backtrack. She cried harder. She said she didn't mean it. She said grief made everyone say things they regret. My dad didn't budge. Within days, Karen moved out. She is now living separately, and my dad has made it clear that this time, there is no going back. For the first time, he chose peace over tolerance. Meanwhile, Mason and Jessica tried one last thing. They went online. They posted long, emotional stories about how they had lost everything. About how they were grieving parents being attacked by a cold, unforgiving man. They hinted at cruelty without saying my name at first, then eventually said it outright. But something unexpected happened. It didn't work. People remembered them. People remembered the affair. People remembered the lies, the videos, the manipulation. Comments started turning on them. People asked why they showed up uninvited. People asked why they wouldn't respect boundaries. People asked why grief was being used as a weapon. For the first time, the sympathy ran out. Their posts were met with skepticism, criticism, and silence. Some were even deleted after backlash. The narrative they had controlled for years finally collapsed. And me? I didn't respond. I didn't post. I didn't defend myself. I was done fighting people who thrived on chaos. Today, my life is quiet. Stable. Normal. After everything settled down a bit, I did talk to a few people who actually mattered to me, my mom, my sister, and a close friend. None of them blamed me for what happened. My mom told me she understood why I snapped. She said anyone who had been pushed, disrespected, and cornered the way I was would eventually break. She reminded me that Mason and Jessica had crossed every boundary imaginable and that I had every right to protect my peace. My sister was even more direct. She said I was right for refusing forgiveness, right for cutting them off, and right for standing my ground when everyone tried to guilt me into emotional labor I didn't owe. She said I didn't do anything wrong by finally telling them no. But both of them also said the same thing. They told me that the karma comment may have gone a little too far. Not because Mason and Jessica deserved kindness, but because bringing their child into it crossed a line that I didn't need to cross to make my point. My sister said, "You were already winning. You didn't need that sentence." One of my closest friends told me something similar. He said he understood exactly why I said it. He said anyone in my position might have lashed out the same way. But he also told me that sometimes people will ignore everything that led up to a moment and focus only on the harshest words spoken at the end. And he was right. I don't regret cutting them off. I don't regret refusing forgiveness. I don't regret choosing myself. If I regret anything at all, it's just that one sentence, because it gave people an excuse to ignore years of betrayal and focus on a few seconds of anger. But even with that regret, one thing hasn't changed. I will never let Mason or Jessica back into my life. And I will never apologize for protecting my peace.